Psalm 126. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the Negeb. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bear the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. This is our last sermon in our Psalms sermon series. This has been a powerful and timely sermon series as we've reflected on human emotion, both reflected in the psalm, but also that many of us are experiencing right now, as we've processed frustration and anger and weariness, a place where many of us are still sitting. I have definitely appreciated each of the sermons, and if you missed a week, I'd encourage you to go back to our YouTube channel to watch them, because each one spoke to a particular moment that I have experienced in this past year and a half and may continue to be experiencing. And even as this Psalm series ends, I know I will continue to be looking to the Psalms to help give words to some of the things that I continue to be going through. Sometimes it's hard to admit when things aren't going well. Sometimes it can be hard to pray to God when you are just in need of help. And the Psalms have helped me have language for that, using the words that have been used for hundreds and thousands of years as people of faith have prayed to God. And next week, we will begin our fall series, Renew, about how a life of faithful discipleship can renew us, even when, and maybe especially when, the world around us is in such upheaval. But today, as we finish out our Psalm series, we are going to be looking at Psalm 126, a psalm of joy, but also a psalm of petition, a song of request from God. When we were choosing the Psalms months ago, we picked the psalm for its exuberance of joy, anticipating that by the beginning of September, we were going to be joyfully returning to school and work, resuming all of our church activities, once again eating out in restaurants, going to concerts, museums. And yet that is not where we are. But this psalm also speaks to that sense of anticipation, of having joy, but also waiting and anticipating when things will be better. The psalm starts with this sense of joy. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoice. But then there's a shift. There is a shift to asking God for restoration. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the Negeb. The Negeb is a desert area. It is speaking of these dry creek beds that through much of the year are just dry, but that when the rains come, the watercourses, the water rushes through. That the psalmist is in an experience of dryness and needs God's living water to come through. And maybe you are struggling with the chronology as I did, that it starts that God has restored and then moves to requesting restoration. And there are a few explanations that I found. One is that Hebrew verbs are very difficult to translate into English, and that the verb tense isn't entirely clear. That it is possible that those first verses, instead of when the Lord restored the fortunes, is really speaking to the future about how, when the Lord will restore the fortunes of Zion. There's also the suggestion that perhaps it is a dream sequence. We were like those who dream. Perhaps this is a dreaming about when God restores the people to Zion, restores the people, brings them back from exile. But also, perhaps it is in chronological order. Perhaps it is that even when things are restored, even when that event that you were waiting for, the thing that was going to fix everything and restore the community happens, that doesn't mean everyone always lives happily ever after, forever and ever. And perhaps that is the case of the people of Israel, that as they return from exile, as they return from Zion, they are filled with joy. It is the thing they have been waiting for, the community has been waiting for. But when they return, it's not as easy as they had hoped. Then becomes the hard work of rebuilding the temple, of rebuilding the community, of once again bringing the people who were in exile with the remnant and helping them to join back into community. That even after return from exile, restoration still needed to happen. And that makes sense to me too. And that makes sense to me as we sit in this place, in this pandemic. That as we months ago waited anxiously for the vaccine to be created, we thought that it would save us. That once we had a vaccine and everyone got it, we would be fine. Everything would be back to normal. But it didn't work out quite that way. That once it existed, we still had to wait. We still waited in patience or impatience, perhaps confusion and frustration as we waited for it to be distributed as quickly as possible, as fairly as possible, but it still took months. And not everyone has felt safe enough to get the vaccine. Or perhaps they couldn't get it because of medical reasons or age. So not as many people have gotten it as we thought they might. And then the Delta variant. Something that totally threw us for a loop. So we remain in this place of having experienced some joy, some restoration, but also needing more. Also in hopeful anticipation that we will not always be in the place that we are. That we will someday be able to take off our masks with each other. That we will be able to have large celebrations again. That God will take our weeping and turn it into joy. And so how might this psalm guide us? The first thing that helped me as I looked at this psalm was the reminder that the Lord has done great things for us. In the psalm, this reminder of the goodness of the Lord first comes from the nations. And it's easy to miss, but that is significant because typically we speak of how God has helped us. But in this psalm, and that's typical in the Psalms, that the God's people speak of the goodness of God. But in this psalm, it first comes from the nations who are not God's people, the people who have not been the recipients of God's goodness and grace, but they see it and they recognize it, and they are the ones that talk to God's people and remind them, look at what God has done for you. The people who aren't even God's people recognize the goodness of what God does. And I find that reassuring, that it is human to forget the good that God has brought us, that sometimes we need others to help us to remember how God has brought us out of difficult times before, that God has given us good in the past, and we can trust God to do it again. That money that came just when you needed it, that healing of an ailment, the call of a friend just when you needed it. And as you tell your stories, as you are reminded of your stories, you can remind others of their stories, or perhaps give them faith because they haven't recognized the goodness of God, or they haven't lived the life in which they have seen it. Younger ones among us have many gifts of enthusiasm, of energy, of spirit, of love, but not always the gift of experience. They may need to hear our stories of how God was with us, of how God rescued us. And so we tell our stories. We remember our stories of the goodness of God, and we speak of them. And it helps the people who hear them, and it helps us to remember. And then we have this imagery of planting while weeping. And this reminds me that we don't have to have it all together. Tears are okay. Tears are not failure. Kimberly Clayton writes in a commentary, often we rush ourselves and others out of grief and sorrow. We are uncomfortable with tears, impatient with the hard work and slow process healing requires, whether the healing is physical, emotional, spiritual, or all three. Have patience with yourself. Have patience with others. Even if you are still in that place of grief, doing that hard work of healing, you can still be sowing seeds. God can work through tear-stained acts. This image of seeds is also an image of hopeful anticipation. You plant seeds and then you have to wait. You do the work to put them in the ground, but on the surface, it looks like nothing has changed. Nothing appears to be happening, and there's nothing you can do to hurry it along. You can only wait for God to make it grow. There is a prayer this reminds me of that was spoken by John Cardinal Dearden and written by Ken Untener, which speaks of this. It helps now and then to step back and take a long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it is even beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is a way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says all that could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future, not our own. Amen. We keep going, even amidst the disappointments and tears, because we have faith that it will make a difference. We have faith to sow seeds, trusting that God will bring a harvest and our tears will turn into joy. May you have experiences of joy. May you remember and experience the good things that God has done for you, for us. And in those moments of weeping, may you be reminded that God will turn weeping into joy. Amen.